Welcome to Emergency Use Only, a podcast that offers you empowered living in a complex world with your host, Dr. Sean Rowland, founder and CEO of Jace Medical.
Welcome to episode number 4. You know, when disaster strikes, people tend to stick together and help those in need. This was particularly true in the town of Rockport, Texas. Back in 2017, Rockport, Texas was a beachside town of about 10,000 people, and they took a direct hit from Hurricane Harvey, which was a Category 4 hurricane. It became the costliest storm in Texas history and accounted for over 100 deaths. Zachary Dearing, who was a Rockport resident and screenwriter by trade, rose to the occasion to help his community in its time of need. This is his remarkable firsthand account. Okay, well, here we are. We are very excited, as I mentioned previously, to have Zach with us. This is, we were talking before we started about just in general about Zach coming on, and because this was something that took place back in 2017, so it's been a few years, but here we are still talking about it, which I think really says a few things. Number one, how amazing what took place was that we're still talking about it, and how important from the perspective of, we're all about empowerment here. We're all about finding truth and looking for those places around our communities where we'll talk about the points of light to take from one of the awards that Zach got. But basically that goodness is out there in the world, and any time that we can find to spread that good word is time well spent. So with that, Zach, welcome. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So we'd love to just hear maybe a little bit about you. What are you doing now? And then maybe let's talk about where you live, where you grew up, and kind of lead us up until the fateful day in August of 2017.
Yeah. As you mentioned, we're coming up on the 6-year anniversary. The storm Hurricane Harvey struck Rockport back in August 25th, 2017. So again, a lot happened, of course, before then, and a lot's happened since. So I was born and raised in Lexington, Kentucky. Went to the University of Kentucky, studied political science and Russian studies. I've been in theater for most of my life, 15 years in regional theater, playwright. I've had a couple of my short plays produced and things like that. But let's see, it was May of 2017, I took an opportunity. There was some interest in a pilot show that I was writing, and I took that opportunity to leave Lexington and go live with my father on his houseboat in a harbor down in Rockport, Texas. So spent most of my life in Lexington, Kentucky, where I am currently. But in 2017, moved down there to focus on the project, and
Tell me about your family. You have siblings?
Yeah, so I have a half brother, but we grew up together. He's a sergeant on the police force here in Lexington. Trains officers at the academy. He's been doing that for 15 years, and he's been recognized himself for a couple of achievements of his own with the police department. I have a son, Phineas. He is 4 years old, and I've just been single dadding the situation since he was 10 months old. So it's me, my boy, and Granny.
Okay. So at the time, well, this was 6 years ago. So single, no kids, and as you mentioned, you just moved in with your father to pursue this opportunity.
Yeah. So let's see. I was 29. It was actually a really easy transition, surprisingly. Dad had just purchased kind of his nest egg, his retirement plan, which was this houseboat, and it was and he's still there down in Rockport. little 40-foot thing. It's enough for two people, but as soon as I got there, I knew I'd certainly be trying to get work and get my own place. It's not huge, so
Yeah,
it's just close quarters for
I've got
me.
to think that being on a houseboat when you hear a hurricane's bearing down is probably causes a little bit of angst.
So there were a lot of things about that particular situation. One, it wasn't insured; he had just gotten it, and that was everything for his retirement.
Yeah.
Essentially. So, and two, leading up to everything, he was essentially hell bent on staying and riding it out on the boat.
Mm.
Is where
Yeah.
this where
Protecting
this started.
his retirement.
Yeah. So he was up with some other family in Houston when we kind of when the early projections for Harvey came in that it was going to hit like Corpus Christi and so 2 days before the storm hit, I was in the harbor. I was on the boat. Dad was up in Houston, and spent 2 days with neighbors. Tying our boats down, helping each other. Like some of the old guys who've been doing this their whole life. They know. I learned a lot. Let's just say that about how you know uh, how you prepare for a storm. How you give enough slack in the lines to make sure your boats have the ability to move with storm surge and all that kind of thing. So leading up to it, Dad was telling me, we're gonna ride it out. It's like a Cat 2. We'll just ride it out in the harbor. And I was like, well, I'm not gonna leave you to do it by yourself. So yeah, like okay, we'll do that. So I spent those 2 days getting the boat prepared. And I had about 2 weeks after moving to Rockport, I had landed a job with the county, which was a great job. It was a dream job, really. Um, we were over harbor maintenance in the beach. So I worked for the county and we maintained the beach. We maintained the harbors in Aransas County. So it's the Aransas County Navigation District. So when I was getting the boat ready and all of that, we had some additional storage options and things to start, anything that we wanted off the boat, we had those options. So, so initially, though this ended up not happening because of the severity of the storm, we were going to stay on the boat for it.
Yeah. So at what point did it was a Cat 2? You could ride it out. At what point did you realize, this is going to be more than that?
So it was, the day before, so August 24th, that whole day I was getting getting the boat prepared. Dad was coming in the next morning, where we were going to ride it out. And that whole day, by the way, I'm watching a line of 10,000 cars going down Market Street, the evacuation road to Houston. And just wondering the whole time if maybe this isn't a great idea. I mean, literally thousands of cars stuck in a block. I mean, as far as you could see, left, right, east, west. I mean, everybody was getting out of Dodge. So that night, it was like 4 a.m. So I guess it was officially August 25th. It was 4 a.m. That lovely emergency broadcast system sound went off on my cell phone, and it it just sent me a text, and I'm sure it went out to everybody that catastrophic danger imminent or something to that degree for your area. It was a hurricane. It was just a warning from the weather service. So at 4 a.m, you get that lovely screeching sound, and it's like imminent danger. And
Now,
went
had you
into
guys
the
talked about any like what was your backup plan? Like, if things got to a certain point, okay, we're going to pull out, we're going to evacuate, we're going to do this, or had you talked about that?
this whole time, Dad was so, because really also the storm didn't escalate until the last minute.
Yeah.
It And also the projection was for it to hit Corpus, which was about 40 miles away. So we knew we'd get, severe bands and things like that. But it stayed at 2, and for most of its approach. And then that last day, the hours leading up to me getting that message on that warning on the cell phone, he and I had been going, maybe, it's gaining power. Maybe we shouldn't be here. But in that event, I had, if we were going to stay and ride it out, there were these concrete pavilions on the beach, and the harbor's really close to the beach. And I had keys to that pavilion, where it was part of county property. I talked to the harbor master and was like, so if things get too bad in the harbor and we can make our way to these concrete pavilions, is that okay that, we ride that out? And,
Yeah.
my father was just at that point a year out into recovery from throat cancer. So, he had, a stoma, and, where he's been, a fish in water for most of his life. Now
Yeah. Death
it's
sentence.
a dangerous situation. Yeah.
Yeah.
If there's any sort of storm surge or anything like that, he just can't be, can't risk it. So we had a couple of ideas, and I'd shared that with him and with some of the other neighbors that, yeah, if the surge is starting to rise way too quickly, we might, because those were elevated as well. Those pavilions, they were, 20 feet up on stilts. So it's like, if we start getting uncomfortable real early, we can head there.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. So the text comes in. It's 4 a.m. Imminent danger. What do you do?
Well, right then I went to bed. I went back to bed because this was like 4 in the morning, and I was like, "Well, okay, I'll probably need some sleep." Like, let's go ahead and try to rest because it hasn't hit yet. It was a beautiful night, honestly.
Huh?
It wasn't until about 9 or 10 a.m. the next morning, so August 25th, the morning of the storm. Dad made it in from Houston, and at this point, we knew it was a strong 4 and could be dipping into 5 and all that kind of thing. And without saying a word, Dad pulls up in front of the houseboat, and it's already drizzling, and he starts grabbing things off the boat and putting them in the car. He's like, "We're not doing this. We're heading out. I'm just
Yeah.
expecting, a total loss on the boat. We're just going to grab the things we can and go to Houston." So he rolled up and immediately, went for the TV and went for, just whatever we could start, salvaging from the boat, expecting it to be a total loss. So yeah, the story changed really, really quickly the moment he arrived into Rockport. It was, we're leaving.
Okay. So at this point, when did this? You said this was around 10-ish in the morning. When did the storm actually make landfall?
The storm didn't officially make landfall, I want to say, until about 10 p.m. that night. So we're
Oh,
about 12 hours before the storm.
okay.
Yeah, it hit at night, and that was probably for the best, because had I been able to see what was going on around me,
Yeah.
it might have changed my opinion on some decisions I made, but I couldn't see
Okay,
anything. So
so you're packing up the car, and the plan is to just get out of Dodge with Dad. But something happens between, I guess, before you actually get out of Dodge with Dad.
yeah,
What happened next?
so we had a neighbor. His boat was 2 slips down. His name was JJ, 77 years old at the time. And up until Dad returned to Rockport, he, old man of the sea, was the one helping me get the boat prepared and teaching me all the proper knots. And keep in mind, when the storm hit, I'd only been in Rockport for 2 months. Like, so, but he was one of the guys that I met early on. And so now that his boat was prepared, our boat was prepared, we got what we wanted off the boat. His plan was to go to a friend of his, had a vacation home about a mile away from the harbor. and he was going to ride the storm out alone in that house. He was given permission to go stay in that house by the individual who owned the home, and so we obviously offered to drive him over there and take him to the house before we on our way out to Houston. And when we got to the house, now we're starting to get some winds. About noon, I mean, you're starting to feel that the weather's different. It's picking up, and that you can just feel the severity of whatever's coming. But we get to the house, and he has trouble getting up the stairs, and it just there was a mandatory evacuation. The entire neighborhood was empty, and I just didn't feel right leaving this guy in this house by himself, where nobody knew he was there. Nobody else was in the neighborhood, and he's already having a little bit of trouble just moving around.
Yeah.
So we're getting him settled in the house, and I had followed with my car, which I'd bought the day before, just an old used car. I followed Dad, and I was going to leave my car at that house and hop in his to go to Houston. But right before we were going to head out, I just told Dad, as a writer, I have a backpack that's always traveled with me of my original notes and all that. And I was like, just take this backpack, because I don't want any of that to get wet. I'm going to stay here with JJ. It just feels right. So I handed him the stuff that I knew would probably get destroyed or damaged that was in my car, and sent Dad on his way. So yeah,
Did
JJ and I
at that time, like, you had, maybe you said, like, it just didn't quite sit well with you. Did you think that things could get serious enough that you might not see your dad again, or was it just pretty just kind of like, okay, hey, this thing's coming. We'll catch it. We'll see you on the other side.
So I guess back to what I was saying a second ago, because I've never really verbalized that. Because even at this point, early on in the day, when I said it, you felt something was coming. Though we were still probably 10 hours out from landfall, the way the wind was, the way it was raining, and we'd been watching the storm come in for, you could see it on the horizon early in the day. It was nasty, but around the time that I was making that decision, that very much felt like a no guarantee. Like everything. That's where the dream began. Let's just say that. A lot of people say, I guess, when they come out of emergency situations, they compare it was like a movie. It was like a dream. It didn't feel like it was happening. Yeah, 100%. That's where the dream began, because my heart was racing when I made the decision to stay. I was very uncomfortable with telling Dad. And yeah, it didn't feel like I'll catch up with you in a couple of days. It felt like I'm really making a decision, and he treated it very much as you understand what you're he knew.
Yeah.
He knew, he could feel it, and I could feel it, and I was like, yeah, like, I'll stay.
Wow.
And the other idea was, to get there early in the morning to check on his boat, get any bilge pumps on, anything after the storm. I was going to stay so that I could get to the boat as soon as possible and make sure that it was still afloat, or that if there was anything I could do to salvage the boat that next morning, I could be there to do that.
Wow. Okay. All right. So you make that pivotal decision, and I get, so you're holed up in this house, and what happens next?
So to back up, but not too much, when we were packing the car, the harbor master came by, who was my boss at the time, and mentioned where this shelter was going to be, which is the shelter I ultimately ended up in. But also was like, because the water was already starting to rise at like 10 a.m. he was like, we're shutting the power. We're killing the power before, So we get into this house, power in all of Rockport's out. And that was, uh, I know in the harbor it was intentional. I'm not sure if it was outside of the harbor or how that works, but when we get in this house, it's a little bit creepy because no one lives there, and there's a bunch of furniture that's like just, I guess the guy hadn't finished moving in, so you just have like dressers and random things just kind of sitting with blankets and stuff in various rooms of the house. But even early on, I decided, he had some like salmon and some groceries that could expire that he decided we're going to cook lunch or whatever. And I was like, I'm going to get my last hot shower before we don't have one for a while. And it was, we've been in the house maybe an hour. And so I guess it was about an hour. Before I go to take the shower, the walls of the house are already moving, sort of like they're breathing, like if you had your hand on a horse's chest and it just felt it breathing. The walls of this house were already doing that, and Dad had been gone for about maybe 40 minutes to an hour. And before I hopped in the shower, I was like, you know what, we might want to see if Dad can turn around, maybe get us out of here. And JJ was like, okay. He was reluctant, but he was like, yeah, maybe we'll. So I called Dad, and at that point in time, it's like, look, we probably shouldn't be here. And he was like, son, I already tried to turn around. The roads are flooded already. I can't get back into Rockport. I was the last man out.
Oh, geez.
And he was about, I don't know, 50 miles away.
Yeah.
In a little town called Tivoli, and he could see it on the horizon. He could see us getting hammered by some of these early bands, but he was like, I can't get to you. So I told him, I'm not comfortable staying in this house. This house is already having issues. And he was like, well, we heard about that shelter. The guys in the harbor and harbor master told us about that shelter. Maybe you should convince JJ to go to that shelter, make a run for it. And he's like, if you have to knock him out, get him in the car and get him to the shelter. It's like, I'm not going to knock an old man out, but but I get what you're saying. But anyway, once I realized that no one could get to us, that we're really here, we're in it now. There's no going back. That's when started making my calls to my girlfriend at the time, who was expecting I was leaving to Houston. I called her. She's like, how's it going? Are you already on your way to Houston? How far are you guys? Da, da, da. And I was like, well, I effed up. And she's like, what do you mean you effed up? I was like, yeah, so I'm staying for it. And she was like, she furious. She's very upset. But like I was telling you earlier, the tone already really did feel different. This wasn't a Cat 2, Cat 3 situation. Like, so, the power will go out and I'll talk to you in a couple of days. It was really concern, just like that conversation between Dad and I. And that's definitely why she was pretty upset. Resolved that, and then called my mother.
Yeah. So hold on. So tell me, because I'm just realizing you're okay. You've got this shelter. I want to get out of the house. Dad can't come get me. I'm on my own with this older gentleman. And I guess so, rather than, or maybe you felt you had a little bit of time, but rather than right then do what you could do to get out, you wanted to make these calls first to let people know where you were and that this was bad. So walk me a little bit through that decision versus throwing everything in your car and getting over to that shelter right away.
So again, those calls were did have a potential feeling of like finality, like just say some goodbyes just in case. I mean, it was starting to feel like that.
Okay.
Like, so when I spoke to my mother, of course, she's glued to her television in Kentucky. She lived in Lexington, and she said, she was the same thing. Are you on your way to Houston? Like, how far are you guys? You guys had a, and I'm like, well, so I let my mother know, and the line just gets really quiet. And she told me that the mayor of Rockport had told everybody to write their social security numbers on their arms with a Sharpie. Anybody who stayed behind needs to write their social security number on their arms with a
Okay.
Sharpie.
So
And
now
my
it's real.
mother asked me to do
Yeah.
that. She said, so will you do one thing for me and please write your social security number on your arm?
Wow.
And so we actually didn't go to the shelter immediately. I mean, this is a good sized house. It's not like it was some shack, but JJ took some convincing, because again, I'm not going to knock the old man out like my father suggested I do if I needed to. But when when I looked outside, I realized that the water in the streets was getting just high enough that this is about as deep as it can get before my car can't handle it.
Yeah.
So yeah. So there were a couple times when trying to convince JJ that we should probably get out of the house and that I saw a Sharpie sitting there and I thought about it. And I was like, you know what? No, that's inviting. That's like inviting. Fate. Like, no,
Yeah.
no. So screw the Sharpie.
Huh.
But finally, he agreed. And I just kept getting this feeling about the house. It's like almost like visions of this. This is where they're going to find us dead in a couple days.
Hmm.
So we get in my car. I had a '99 Isuzu Rodeo, so a little miniature mini SUV or whatever. And it was probably, I mean, we were at the house for a good bit before I could get him to leave. So it was probably about 6 p.m. before we decided to make this run. I'm like, this is our last chance because my car won't make it if we don't go now. And so at about 6, we leave that house.
Well,
And
now, did you ever consider? I mean, the whole reason you stayed was to make it, so he didn't have to ride this out alone. But at some point, did you ever consider leaving him there if he wasn't going to agree to leave?
no,
Not an option.
No one does this. You don't do things like this alone. No. Yeah, that wasn't an option. Knocking him out was a sooner option.
It would have happened too, sure.
Knocking him out and putting him in the car and having him wake
Yeah.
up at the shelter. That would have been a sooner solution than leaving him alone.
Yeah. Okay. So in either case, though, he agrees to go. It's a little late, but
we're probably about 3 hours from landfall, and I've only had my car for a day. So as far as Rockport's concerned, I only know the places that I was able to walk to, so I don't even really know my way around. And all the street signs are down, and I have to trust that JJ knows how to get to this school. And the drive, I guess, to give it a little perspective, when by this time when the winds were strong enough that when the street signs would hit the ground, they would spark. So I'm fighting the wind to stay on the road. There's already water on the road. Palm trees, just gigantic palm trees are already down and just slowly blowing across the road, blocking. I had to go into other lanes of traffic and all this, and I have no signs. I'm just trusting that this guy in the middle of all this knows where we're going. And a power line snapped. I thought it was going to come through the windshield but it ended up cutting off my driver's side mirror.
Jeez.
And then branches blew through the back two windows of the car. And that was about 4 or 5 minutes into the drive.
I mean, we're talking, I guess at this point, right? Category 4, 130, 140, 150 mile an hour winds.
So these were the early bands.
And these were still, okay. Yeah. So we still hadn't
The storm hadn't made landfall yet, and it was like this. We were well over tropical. I'd say we were probably at Cat 2 kind of conditions, but these were the outer bands for sure, because it really didn't hit until you knew when it really hit.
Yeah.
But yeah, this was the last little bit of daylight, and it was well, not the last little bit, but it was getting towards the end of the day, and yeah, this was already bad. It was already
So, I mean, yeah, your windows busted out, you're dodging live power lines. How long did it take to get from the house to the shelter?
I wanted to rush it, so I had a heavy foot, but JJ kind of kept me rational,
Mm-hmm.
and we took our time with it. So what should have been probably a 10, 12-minute drive probably took us a half hour to 40 minutes to get there. And what was really odd was, for no reason at all, while we were driving, JJ looked out the window, and because he knew I was afraid, and I know he was afraid as well, and just kind of staring off, he says, I don't believe in heroes. He said, we all get scared. It's just a matter of what you do with the fear. And just that was his way of calming me down, and I used that for the rest of the night. It's what you do with the fear. You can either let it cripple you, or you use it to fuel yourself. But anyway, yeah. So just the drive there, everything leading up to just getting to the school was a ride.
And so, did you have expectations in your mind, like, okay, we're going to the shelter, and other than maybe, I'm just putting myself in that position, I probably would just think this is a place of safety, but not necessarily think anything more than that. Did you have any thoughts going through your mind about what to expect once you got there?
Just hoping it was the right place. But no, I assumed, I think what anybody would assume as a designated shelter, there'd be some sort of leadership. You'd probably have city officials, you'd probably have emergency services, and probably just a bunch of, blankets, cots, and people just kind of hanging out. That's 100% what I expected. And that's 100% what was not happening.
So you pull up, the ambulances are there, and they're ready to, and all the officials are there, and they're super well stocked, and everything's just running like a clock.
Yeah, the end. No, that's not at all. When we pulled up to the shelter, we get inside. It's already dark. The power's out. It's been out for most of the day at this point. The drop ceilings have already come down. The roof is leaking. There's already sewage overflowing. And there are just, people roaming the hallways with blankets. When we arrived, there were probably about 90 people in the shelter, 60% of which were elderly, many of whom were there by themselves, dropped off, I think, from one of the care centers. I'm not sure. I've heard a couple different things, but it was predominantly the elderly. And when I got there, I went to, I guess, check in and look for someone, like, where do you want us? Where do we need to be? And I found, there was an EMT in the nurses station. and she said, just sign in. And I go over to this in the dark, to this sign in sheet that's waterlogged and just like falling apart on the table because the table's soaking wet. All the ink's bled through. I'm like, all right, this is good. And yeah, that's basically what we walked into. So it was every man for himself, go find a dry spot and, suffer in silence, I guess.
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess at some point along the way, you realize something's got to be done. I guess, was there something that happened that was kind of like, this is the last straw, or how did you get to that point? And then what did you do?
As a couple things happened. I already noticed some of the kids going around making an effort to help people, but maybe not entirely sure how to, offering water, just checking in on people. And there was one girl in particular who became just pivotal. She was a huge help throughout the night. Her name is Michonne Hunt, and she was 17 years old, and she had a 7-month-old baby in the shelter. And I noticed, her demeanor, how calm she was, how sweet she was, how positive she was, and just making an effort. It was that alone was kind of that was maybe the initial spark where I went, okay, there might be something to work with here. But something else that kind of, I guess, cemented it was two guys that were high school age took one of the floor waxers and was going down hallways and playing with a floor polisher or something like that. And there was a teacher there from the school, and I thought maybe he was in charge of the shelter, but he wasn't. He was just another person there. And we went to go track these kids down there playing with this polisher, floor polisher, and it was their teacher. And I guess I forget. I ended up going to talk to them, like, hey, like, not get so that you guys aren't in trouble with your teacher. It'd probably be cool if you just go out there and like clean up the mess, like make an effort. Like, we're gonna be here together for a while. Like, let's not let this be an issue. Like, so I'll go help you. So I ended up making, I guess, friendships with some of the kids, some of the other people in there, just through various things. And I guess the closer it got to landfall, and the more people I'd kind of been conversing with and getting an idea of, like, do we know where there's any food in here? Do we know if there's any water? Who's in charge? What's the latest you've heard on the storm? Like, do we know what the latest was on storm surge? Because I think we'd heard 12 to 14 feet, which could possibly put that school underwater with where it was. And so at some point, I just felt like I had enough to work with, I guess. And I was inspired by the efforts that were already being made, the compassion that was already shining through. And I remember asking them, do we know if there are any sandbags so that we can, or anything to block under the exterior doors in case we do get this storm surge, to buy us some time. And, as we kind of did a check-in and started throwing some ideas out, I was like, well, who's ready to work? And like a movie, these kids that were in the lobby of this school all just raised their hands. I'm like, okay. So I was like, all right, in case we have storm surge, what can buy us time? We don't have sandbags to our knowledge. And I was like, best idea wins. And we just started throwing out ideas. And one of the kids said, how about rugs? And I was like, cool. Rugs. Let's go ahead and get our exterior doors taken care of to buy us time for anything else, right? So I broke everybody into, I was like, nobody does this alone. Broke everybody into 2-person teams. And I was like, let's make it fun. Like, go grab every rug you can find. Let's bring them out to the lobby, and then we'll go put them out. And when they raised their hands to say that they were ready to work, they disappeared into the dark. About 10-15 minutes goes by, and I'm like, I'll never see them again. It's over. It's done. I'll probably just go into the restroom and, like, ride it out there. But they came back, and then they went back, and then they came back with more and more and more. And in the meantime, I had to figure out how many exterior doors we even had. So I went into the administration office and found like a school map that was on the wall, and just counted the doors, and then went with the kids. We assigned hallways and went to go shove these rugs and anything we could under the exterior doors. So now that we had that done, we come back to the lobby. I'm like, okay, next thing is we've got water coming into the building, just relentlessly, just leaks in the roof, just streams of water. So it's like garbage cans, anything that can hold water. Everybody was like, cool. They took off, came back with everything from candy holders to little trash cans to big trash cans to anything that would hold water. And we did the same thing, went through the school and just started collecting the rainwater, keep it off the floor so that we could try and keep as much dry space available as possible.
How much time have you
that
done by up to this point since you arrived?
I'd say I was there for about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours before we really started doing anything. There was a period of time of just feeling out the situation. And like just trying to have calm chit chat with people. And then I think what kind of really broke the ice was those guys on the freaking going for a joyride with the floor polisher. Right. So I was like, all right, yeah. So yeah.
It's just interesting. I mean, there's a lot you can unpack about this whole process of stepping up or stepping into or falling into, however, any way you look at it, into that, where you're now the de facto kind of leader. Interesting to look at and see how there were examples from others who were just, putting forth a good, kind effort that were in their own small way inspirational to you to lead to more, to you taking more charge or being more proactive. We could just put it that way, I guess. And it's very interesting. But so as you're kind of, it seems like you're starting to maybe hit a stride here. You've got your team, you're executing on you've identified needs, you're executing on plans to solve those needs. You talked about storm surge, the water containers. What were did you have, you mentioned, you had older people there, possibly from a care center, probably in wheelchairs, probably had their own health issues. But you also said you had an EMT when you first arrived, or a nurse. So it sounds like maybe there were some medical people there. Did you have any training yourself in any kind of first aid or anything?
No. I think I'd taken a first aid course maybe 6 years earlier for a job that I had, but no, no experience like that. And from what I could piece together afterwards, was apparently all the officials that were supposed to be there were there until about noon or 1. And then no one, once, I guess it was a shift change, a handoff, the handoff never really happened, is what it sounds like. So by the time I got there, everybody just been kind of roaming around for, I guess, 6-7 hours, with no specific idea of what they have to work with or what to be doing, or leadership. But yeah, so in the months after that, that's kind of what we found out happened, was some people just
Well, so
didn't show up.
so they're left to fend for themselves. Did you have any health concerns, things that were ongoing that needed attention, or for the most part were people kind of okay?
So after a while, didn't take too long, but it became apparent and evident that we had 6 people who required oxygen. Now, this became a real challenge later in the evening, but we had 6 that were on oxygen, and 2 that were hospice. Now, of course, when we were doing everything to just kind of prepare the building, I hadn't gone through and really taken stock of who we had in there. It wasn't until things started going wrong, because I was initially trying to organize things for physical security and safety. Like, for example, once we got the leaks taken care of, and the doors secured, use that map to try to find access to the roof, because I imagined that if we had storm surge, we were going to have to get people to the roof.
Mm-hmm.
And we went searching for roof access, and we found it because one of the kids pointed out wind and water coming out from under one of the doors. Now, this is an interior room, but the roof hatch had opened and is blowing water out the door, like outside of the maintenance room. So we did find our roof access. If we had a plan to get people to the roof if we needed to do that. So at that point, I was concerned about food, water, because we didn't know where it was, blankets, because we didn't have enough blankets. There were enough cots. When I got there, all the cots were already taken. They probably had 40 cots. Like, that was about it as far as bedding. And no, you would hope there'd be a lot of, like, everybody would know where food and water and blankets and things like that were. And they just, I don't know if it was locked up, or if it just wasn't there, but we didn't have anything like that to work with. So it took honestly until probably about 3 hours in, because once we got things secured, in a better state, a little more organized, that's when we all started doing just like 20-minute rounds to go check on people, right? And that's when we started being able to take stock of, how many people we have in the building, and what their condition is, and, if there are any issues. And,
how many people
that's
did you?
when, by the time that we were doing things and really hustling, probably 90 to 110, because all through the night people kept arriving, and it became a mission of ours, and a personal, I guess, mission of mine. Look, if you have a bunch of people in a confined space together, not confined, but in a
contained.
Yeah. It's the whole people in humans in groups. They can be smart individually, but humans in groups can be kind of dumb. When you're in a terrifying situation like this, the last thing you want is for panic or fear, an environment of panic or fear. The emotional stability of that situation really matters, because if you lose control of that, it spreads. Right. So my personal, what felt very important to me was not letting people feel the way I felt when I walked in. So as people showed up, it was, myself and some of the other boys would occasionally volunteer. The idea would be, we go out to their car, we help them bring things in from their car. One of us will go park their car, and we get them inside where Michonne and some of the other kids would help them go find a dry place. So we would greet them, get their stuff inside, and basically hand them off to somebody else who would help them get situated in the building. And during that time, I would ask if they had food or water that they could contribute because we didn't know where our supplies were. So back to how many people we had at that time, we'd probably taken in 20 more. And now we're getting families that just had my drive was bad. I know
Yeah.
their drive was horrendous. So, when we're running up to these cars, and it's hard to get the doors open, just with the wind, it's hard to get the doors open. The kids are crying. The parents are in shock. I felt like in order to keep things orderly, they needed to immediately be immersed into an environment that felt like it had something, I guess, relatively under control, relatively smooth, a calm populace. Let's take you out of this moment of hell and do the best we can to bring comfort, to help ease that.
So, all right, you're going through the night. People are coming in, getting a better idea of what you've got to work with, and coming up with, I guess, some level of organization. The storm, I guess, at this point is really raging all over, and where are we kind of? Have we hit first light yet through the night? Is there anything that happens between then? Because ultimately, you guys kind of come out maybe after the storm, and you need to assess what's going on.
Yeah. So the eye hit at night, and the eye was over us for probably about an hour. Now, I'd been through a hurricane before. It was Hurricane Irene when there was a brief time where we lived in the Florida Keys. And when the eye goes over, it, you can see it, it's a really phenomenal experience. But this one, the stars were out. You could, the frogs, the insects, it was beautiful, but you could already start gathering. This was this is bad. It was so of course your first eye wall, the wind is blowing 170 miles an hour one direction. I think it was 160 miles an hour sustained for this thing was on us for about 14 hours. So it was sustained at about 140 to 160 for that duration. And then it would have gusts up to 200 and things like that. So, the first eye wall passed through. We hit the eye. And during the second eye wall is when the police made it to the building. We had a couple of Rockport police officers that made it. They showed up in an armored car. They made it in an armored car is what it took for them to get there. And we got another EMT at that point. But
had there been communication outside to any officials to say, like, hey, we're here, there's over 100 people, we don't have supplies, or we need this or that, or no communication like that?
No communication until the officers showed up. And then they spent the evening putting themselves in danger to go out and try to make these radio calls to the fire department and all this, especially as we started running out of oxygen. We started running out of our oxygen supply for the 6 people who required oxygen. And the fire department just kept coming back at us like, we can't make it to you. We can't make it to you. You're going to have to figure something out. But these 2 officers, I didn't realize that I had taken charge of the situation until hours into it, when I realized that I'm just hearing my name in the dark, Zach. And it finally dawned on me that any issue that was happening somewhere in the building, people were coming to me, and I was like, okay, so I figured that out. It landed on me. I was like, okay, so composure, right?
Well, which is also that you didn't make the conscious decision, like, okay, I'm going to take charge of this group, and it was very organic. It just, as things developed, and then you realize, like, okay, and this is, everyone's looking to me, and and maintain that composure and push on.
Yeah, as that dawned on me, JJ the whole time sat against the wall in a chair in one of the hallways, and he was watching, observing the whole thing,
Hmm.
and would occasionally call me over and give me some wisdom about, or some outward uh, recommendations about how I was handling things, right,
Hmm.
and how I was composing, how I was coming across, and I welcomed that. I was like, this seems like it's going, am I being too overbearing? Am I da da da? He was just there to reassure me through the night that no, this is going fine. You're doing fine. But yeah, it was once I realized that every problem that arose, it was coming to me for a decision. Um, and that's the other thing with making the rounds that we made all night, was I had these kids going and shining a flashlight on everybody every 20 minutes, and they were coming back to me like, these people are pissed. They are tired of us hitting them with flashlights and like asking them questions if they need anything. And I was like, good, because like, just keep doing it, because at some point they'll know who to ask if they need something. We need to establish some sort of presence that
Hmm.
that people can understand,
That's
that
insightful.
when you come around again in 20 minutes, they may have hated you before, but there may be something they need now. And
Hmm.
throughout the night, we took turns. A lot of people couldn't get to the restroom themselves or use the restroom on their own. So
Hmm.
here you are with a flashlight in your mouth, and you got these kids 16 to 21, physically putting people on the toilet in the dark with a flashlight in their mouth, and helping them use the restroom, helping the elderly use the restroom.
Hmm.
And, we, of course, using the water that we collected from the roofs to like flush the toilet, because
Hmm.
we only had one working toilet. Um, but yeah, you want to talk about some inspiring things? Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. Just took that whole team, and all of them being really young. It'd be interesting to hear how they maybe were affected down the road by that, what they went on to do. But that's really interesting. So okay, so the police show up. They've helped a little bit and with some communication, but there's not much anyone can really do support wise, just because no one can get to you. And now you're on the other side of the eye, riding out the other side of the storm,
hmm
and
that was
eventually,
the worst. That was the worst side of the storm.
it, was it worse in the ferocity of the storm, or because by then, or it had been such a long time? What made it worse?
The ferocity, by far. Um, Working for the county, of course, the next day I actually went back to work as people from the county came back into town that had done the right thing and evacuated. Um, when we were briefed, because we were first responders, they estimated that Rockport took anywhere from 60 to 80 tornadoes. And you could see the marks throughout the town. There would be scars, long runs, and one house would be hit, another one would be skipped. But if you were at an elevated position, you just saw these scars all the way across the town. Just anywhere you went, you could follow, you could trace in the destruction, you could trace the path of the tornadoes. And it was the the second eye wall, where, I guess, to jump to the point, we took, I believe we took two tornadoes to the school. One was close to us, and the other, I'm fairly confident, hit us, because it just sounded different. You could feel it under your feet. Um, and I remember the kids coming up to me, because 12 hours of the same sound, this hellacious sound,
Yeah,
you get used to it. But when there's a different sound, you're like, that's new.
yeah.
And I remember one of the boys, Josh, went, you know, that sounds different. What do we do? And I was like, we just continue doing what we are doing. But when that hit, this is why we're convinced it was a tornado. Was the roof in the gymnasium started slamming, and all the basketball goals started moving, and of course everybody's screaming for their lives. And I'm just trying to keep these kids focused on doing what we're doing to take, more than anything, take our minds off of what's going on around us. Um, but those giant air conditioning units that are like on the roofs of, well,
Mhm.
we heard one just doo 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 go rolling down the hall above us. So yeah, the second the second wall was by far the worst, and it was right as it was starting to hit that I was a boy, Robbie Palmer, and I were actually out of the school, probably 200 yards away, as the eye was ending, because someone had asked us to go get their neighbor that was in the houses in that neighborhood. Um, this woman came up to us, who it started with the night. It started with her being really crabby, and by the end of it, she was really, really kind, and I guess had a lot of gratitude. Was very kind to us, but at this point in time, not so much. She was like, as the second eye wall is about to hit, she goes, um, my house is across the street, and she goes, my how'd she refer to her? She said, my friend is in the RV that's in my driveway. She said, frankly, I can't stand the bitch, but someone needs to go get her.
Mhm.
And I look at the officers, and Robbie's standing there with me, and I'm like, it's starting to rain again. The eye is ending, and a lot of people would come out. I'd let them come out for like smoke break, and they're like, the storm's over. And I'm like, well, we're halfway there.
Yeah.
We might want to start getting inside. Um, the officers couldn't leave the school, and I understood that. It's I don't know. That was not their assignment. Um, and I guess had something happened out there, now you've got a building full of people without any sort of authority. So I understood that. So I borrowed a flashlight. She said, she gave us her keys. She said, you can go into my kitchen, get any food that you can find, but someone needs to get her out of that trailer. And so we went, and right as we're getting there, the the second eye wall starts hitting, and there's a, what do you call it? Basically, there was already about 2 feet of water on the ground, but there were these parts where there were drainage ditches where it'd get about 6 to 8 feet deep to get over there. So there was a portion of it we had to swim, and
Wow.
we got to the RV, and I guess she saw our flashlights or something, but the door swings open, and she's, you know, what are y'all doing out here? I'm like, man, we've your neighbor told us we should probably come get you. Why don't you grab a couple things, and you come with us back to the school. And she disappears into the thing, can't get the door shut, goes back in, um, you know, and she starts putting things together. And Robbie's trying to get into her house and drops the keys in the water and can't find the keys. And so he breaks a window, goes in there, stuffs a bunch of canned food. I mean, there was already a tree in the roof, so it's like,
Broken window and that stuff.
yeah, the broken window is not going to matter much. So he comes out with the backpack. We've got her, and we're taking her across the drainage ditch, which she can't swim. The
Mm.
it just we got her back to the school, right as that second eye wall was setting in. And back to the officers, their responsibility. I understand. Like, when they showed up, I really hoped, like, I was holding the ball. I realized I was holding the ball, and I was, really relieved to see them and hope I could hand the ball off.
Mm.
But instead, the reaction was, because I was talking about, if you need this done, I've got a team that can da 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 da. And I said, well, Mr. Dearing, it sounds like you've already got it under control. Where do you need us?
Hmm.
And I guess took my ball and just held on to it again. But it was, I understand, I guess now, and that was a tricky line to walk, is you don't want to undercut the authority that's going to help be there to keep order, right? So, you know, I didn't want to appear as though I'm ordering officers around or anything like that. I would go to them to the side and, you know, and like I had one officer just look after all the food and water that was locked in the administration office. I was like, and then I had the other just be a presence, because the authority could probably be comforting, and also just if there's theft, anything like that, any sort of tempers flaring. So,
Did you have an idea or an expectation of, okay, if we can just make it to this point in time, or we just need to last until the morning, and then the cavalry will come, or we need to prepare for, to dig in here. Really, it might take a few days or longer. What was your thinking there?
My thinking was during the storm, it was immediately anything pressing, right? No long-term goals. It's moment to moment. And like with the oxygen situation, asking people to share oxygen because people are literally dying because they don't have enough. And I'm having to go to the wife of a hospice patient and ask her to share oxygen with no guarantee that we'll get anything in the morning, because a gentleman's dying in the gym, whispering, "I can't breathe," and turning the gray color. During the storm, I just stayed on top of the problems as they came. And as we got a new EMT, one of the problems we were combating was hypothermia. Because as we were going out in the storms with soaking wet clothes, and he was great, Matt, I forget his last name, but he was like, I can work with a lot of these other issues we have. He goes, but we got to keep people dry because I'm not equipped to handle hypothermia. We can't let these people get cold. It'll be a situation that's out of my control. And, so I guess to wrap up all the kind of immediate problems, we reorganized where we had people so that it was easier for for the EMT to address problems instead of having to. It was a big building. It's a huge school. Instead of having everybody spread out that might need attention, we consolidated and made sure, that was organized so that he didn't have to do a bunch of running. Because it's not like we had radios where we could call to each other. When something needed to happen, you disappear into the dark. And then 10, 15 minutes later, someone shows back up. I mean, you have no way of communicating. So it wasn't until the next morning when the sun came up that you start thinking about the long term. And
okay. So when the sun does come up, I guess you've survived. By the way, and did you have any deaths from anyone there?
No. We were very, very, very close.
Really? Wow. But okay.
There was, but we pulled it off. It was the issue was the oxygen.
Yeah.
There was one gentleman that was right there. And if it hadn't been for the kindness of someone else, without the promise of their husband getting any sort of replenishment on his oxygen supply, had they not volunteered it, he would have passed away.
Wow. Okay, so you get through the night, everyone's alive, and you're able to kind of see now the devastation. Was it at that point that now the cavalry came, or were you still on your own? And what happened?
No, journalists showed up first.
Okay.
Good Morning America was there.
Really? At the shelter?
Yeah, they showed up. So I caught one catnap outside during the storm. Robbie took things over, and I fell asleep for 15 minutes outside on a bench. And then after we got the oxygen situation handled, I mean, I told him, I was like, I have to get sleep. It's my turn because I'm starting to make bad decisions. Like, I just can't go any further, right? So like maybe at 5:30 in the morning, I slept for about an hour and a half, and when I woke up, now there are new police officers. There's the other ones had left, and now I've got new officers here, and I was sleeping on top of a table in the cafeteria. And I show up and I'm like, where are the officers at? And these guys are new faces and we don't, but yeah, Good Morning America's there. And I'm like, okay, now we're thinking about long term. And I said this, I pulled Michonne aside and Josh, and I was like this, because I felt like they could handle themselves on camera. I said, this is our opportunity. We don't know how long we're going to be here. We need to use this opportunity to tell them what we need, which we need food, we need water, we need sanitary supplies, we need, and so we did an interview, I guess live on Good Morning America. And I didn't think anything of it other than that was our kind of plea, like to get that out there. I went through multiple agencies that would just kind of come through. I think someone was from FEMA, someone was local police, and each time I would try to, where they were all new faces, I would try to, walk up and give them kind of the lowdown on everything, what the situation is, and they keep hitting me with it's okay, it's a plea, if you don't mind, just, we've got it, and inevitably, across the parking lot, 15 minutes later, I'd see someone pointing at me, like and then they come back over. And so I went through a couple of rounds of walking through multiple people through the school to tell them what our situation was, and they would leave and nothing would come of it. But there was one guy that for sure got it done, and his name is Lieutenant Edward Groves. He showed up. He was the last guy. At that point in time, the jail had managed to come in and set up food, bring us food, right? And I figured that was the best opportunity for us to get a new head count, right? People are going to show up to eat. So I needed a new head count just to know how many people I had in the building, and so as I guess lunch, it was about lunchtime, as lunch is being served, that's when Groves comes just like storming up, and he's like, "Are you Zach?" And I'm like, "Yes, I'm Zach." And he's like, "What do you need?" I was like, "Well, I'll walk you through the building, show you what we're working with." He goes, No. They've already told me. What do you need? And so I gave him, well, we need cots, we need bedding, we need sanitary supplies, we need food, water, and a generator. And if you can't get us a generator, we need buses, because we can't do it in this building. And he goes, "Cool," and like goes back to his car and disappears. No, just straight in, straight out. So after the lieutenant disappears, that's when people are wanting to leave and go check on their properties. And I felt like until we had emergency services show up, we wanted to try to keep people in one location as much as possible. So I took a list of addresses, and 3 people with me. We siphoned gas into a truck to get it, because the other cars weren't running, wouldn't start, and we were going to go, gather additional supplies to bring back to the school and check on properties. And so in that intermediate time where Groves had left, we spent about 2 hours going to what remained of some of their homes. One of the homes, one of the boys that was helping us, Nathan, we went to his house and it was totally destroyed. We walk in and it's unrecognizable. It's literally just a pile of wood. But we went and gathered some things that he said he had there so that we could bring them back. Like some adult diapers that were his grandfather's, and we had some stuff there at his house that we could use. So while everybody was like eating breakfast and all that, we went and made the rounds, and pretty much everybody that I that gave me a property, when I came back, I had to break the news that nothing's there. That and nothing will probably be here for.
How'd they take that?
That's not something I ever want to have to do again. tell somebody that they've lost everything. But there was one kid that stuck out. He was 18, living on his own for the first time, and he didn't know where to go, what to do. Didn't have any family, and I just held him while I cried. And you just had, it's a retirement community, and a lot of people, it's their retirement. Yeah, it's all they had. And we're talking entire apartment complexes, condominiums that had slid into the bay, insane damage. But it was midday as people are being fed like lunch, because I guess the jail was there in the morning and through lunch, because all I know is Groves wanted to know before he left how many people he had, and that's how we got the head count, was because people were eating. And I guess it was 4 hours later, as some of the kids came to get me, and they're like, Zach, you need to come outside. And it's the first wave of the National Guard. It's the Texas Emergency Medical Task Force, and Groves. And behind them is 4 or 5 buses, like tour buses. And this convoy rolls up, and you're seeing people with oxygen, all the things you need, and stretchers and gurneys and all the things that you've not had for 14 hours. That's been approaching the building and just without hesitation getting to work, And Groves meets me at the flagpole, which is bent in half, and he said, Mr. Dearing, I couldn't get you a generator, so I got you buses. We're gonna take these people to Austin. Your work is done. And I collapsed and cried, just like any hero would, right? But no, it was overwhelming, and I ushered myself someplace private, but the relief I felt, those people will never know how grateful I am for what they do, and what it feels like to see them, your emergency services and all these, when you need them. It's hard to, that's some hero stuff.
Well, I mean, yeah, I can that weight, that mantle of responsibility that really had been placed on you, and not having, and like you said, you're living in the moment. You were living moment by moment and reacting, and then to just from one moment to the next, boom, have that mantle transferred over to them. Yeah, that had to have been quite the sense of relief and like you said, gratitude.
It was, because after something like that, there's so much confusion naturally, right? And I've been talking to people all morning, and you're just never sure if someone's really going to come through. On, they've got a lot on their plate, to be fair. I mean, but when it comes through, yeah.
Well, so okay, so let's just spend the last little bit talking about some of the fallout here as word got out about what the people at this shelter endured, and how they made it through here, and word got out that you were an integral piece of that. You were interviewed by a lot of news outlets, articles were written. You received this award this was at I believe they were trying to raise awareness and funds for all the rebuilding from the hurricane, and this was a group of
the deep from the heart,
deep from the heart.
Yeah, concert.
So take me through. Yeah, what was that like? I'd love to hear kind of how that came about. And when you actually got the award? And
The way we'll just go to the morning after the storm and 2 days after the storm, where we have no cell service, obviously, no power, no water, da 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 da. I wasn't able to reach out to my mother, my father, anybody, had no way of, and, eventually after we got everybody evacuated that night, the next morning I went to work. I was in the harbors and I had no idea that the story had broke from
okay.
Reuters. And I hadn't spoken to my mother. I hadn't spoken to my father. Um, and I'm just pulling dead animals and debris out of the harbor with my guys at work, clearing roads. And when we finally got cell service, there was one overpass that you could go to, and you know, uh, there were like 200 people up there trying to make a phone call because that's the only place you could get service. And when I called, my mother, she no, actually, it was my girlfriend that I spoke to first. She said, um, "Well, hello, hometown hero," and I was like, she's like, "You need to get to internet like really soon." I was like, "I don't think you understand. We don't have leaves on trees for like 20 miles around." Like, she's like, "No, you need to get to internet." And yeah, so apparently all this had happened. My mother found out that I was alive on Google because of the Reuters article. Because she'd been calling emergency officials and everything, try to get like a list of, even if it was like the serial not or the social security number list, you know what I mean? Like, she was calling everybody, and she Googled me, and that's when she found out that I was alive and found out what had happened. But I
Wow.
spoke to my mother, and she was telling me that you know that the mayor of Lexington wanted a phone call with me, and da da da, and that there was news had shown up to her house up in Lexington, and she'd been getting pestered for 2 days, 3 days, or however long it had been. And it was through her that, like, we'd heard the Ellen DeGeneres show and all this, and I had no idea any of this was going on. I just that's um,
You're
those were the
pulling
first phone calls I
dead,
made.
dead animals still out of the water, just still
Yeah,
working there.
we're just doing our thing, and I have no idea what's going on. Like, when I got to Facebook, there were like 10,000 messages. It caps out. It says like 999 plus, and then but and from all over the world, and from Sweden, from Russia, from the UK, from every state in the United States. And what was wonderful about it was everybody thanking me for good news. And there's
Hmm.
so much rough news out there that, like, that, yes, like, that the positive impact of what had gone on, that sank in for people, and that was so important to me. Like,
Hmm.
yeah. So anyway, a couple days go by, and I get nominated. We still don't know who nominated me for Points of Light, but the foundation reached out to me and said that the Deep from the Heart uh, concert was happening, and that they wanted me to be recognized on stage, and that it would be with the 5 living former U.S. presidents, and they asked if I'd like to do that.
Were you hesitant?
I, floored is what I was.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. I this whole thing just feels like I just did what felt right, what you're supposed to do. I didn't think anything of this, and then a couple of days later to be
Yeah.
asked if you want to meet 5 U.S. presidents, it was humbling.
No, that's a good, yeah, I'll bet. Well, okay, so it's been 6 years. When in the days, weeks afterwards, as you looked back, and I probably pulled some lessons from it, and now 6 years later, as you revisit things, as you think about it, or the path that your life has taken, all this, as time has gone on, what is, I guess, what's one of, or one of the main take home points or life lessons, something that came out of this experience for you?
Like JJ said, there's no such thing as, or I don't believe in heroes. Everybody gets scared at times, and it's a matter of what you do with fear, or in trying times. For me, this experience taught me a lot about myself. But I think the biggest takeaway for me is that people are inherently good. You know, it this is a disaster story, and it's so easy to focus on the negative side of this. But I could go on for another couple hours about the acts of kindness that happened that night and in the weeks after the storm. People, when it comes down to it, in a situation like that, you see a beautiful side of humanity. It may be sad that it takes that sometimes to see that side of people, but it's there. Yeah, and so much so, it was the next morning after the storm. So, like, the next day, the day after, at 5 a.m, a husband and wife from Austin, we hear someone shouting in the dark outside, and this husband and wife from Austin had driven down, filled the back of their truck with cases of water, and were just driving down abandoned streets in the dark, shouting out for people, see if they needed water and any of the other supplies that they had. They drove straight down, paid out of pocket for all that stuff. It's just people came in from all over the state, all over the country. Yeah, it's
inspiring.
I saw so much good. Yeah,
that you're absolutely right. That about kindness, I love. In fact, I think it was written the way you put it. And this was this may have been from Points of Light. I've learned that within people there exists inherent goodness. When times are at their most dire, that goodness shows up. Kind hearts come in many forms. And I think certainly you could trace this all the way back to probably to before even things that happened in your childhood, but at least we could trace this back to the decision you made at the very beginning to have your dad go on and stay and help this neighbor. That was a decision based on kindness. There was no other reason to do that. And the repercussions of that, which you had no idea at the time, were so far reaching. And if that's not a good take home from all this, I don't know what is. But I'm grateful for your willingness to retell your story. That the example of kindness, I love it. Is there anything else you've left out or wanted to say?
No, again, I could go on for hours about the acts of kindness that followed. And, when I said it comes in all forms, the hearts, who'd have imagined that a 17-year-old mother, 16-year-old high school student, couple of them, 18-year-old boy, would go out there and risk their lives for people they don't know, except simply because it felt like the right thing to do. Because they were in a position to help those who could not help themselves. And that, in all honesty, they set the example for me because they were doing it first. Yeah.
Well, it's a beautiful story, beautiful and inspiring. And we thank you again. Thank you so much for coming on and for your time.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
Thanks, Zach.
Thanks for listening to Emergency Use Only, empowered living in a complex world. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and that it helped bring some light into your day. Remember, you have the ability to overcome your problems and maintain positivity throughout your life.